Welcome everyone to the Hyperloop seminar. This is already our sixth edition. Exactly. So just very quickly, either as a reminder or if you are here for the first time. After the talk, so today we are going to have one talk from Lotte. And after the talk, we're going to have a question round. So you can put in your questions already during the talk. There is this Q&A button directly in Zoom. So you can place the questions there. You can also do that anonymously. And exactly, so after the talk, we're going to go through all the questions. And yeah, also you can upload other questions if you like them, so we can make sure to answer that one. Yeah, with that being said, I think we can already go to our first talk, and Lucas is going to do an introduction for Lotte. So I give the word to Lucas.
Thank you very much. So in absence of Julian, I will be going to present you Lotte today. She's a consultant at PA Consulting that's previously majored in complex systems engineering, policy analysis, and management, as I've heard. So today she's going to present us her thesis about the competitiveness of design of Hyperloop and its competitive position compared to, for example, short-haul flights. I guess this is really a really interesting topic, especially as we see more and more countries banning short-haul flights. Like, for example, France with a ban of, I think, less than 2.5 hours train ride. Austria has a ban train rides for shorter flights for replacement trains shorter than 3 hours. Netherlands, I think it's in discussions. You're probably more in that. I think for 150 kilometers or 500 kilometers, something about that. And then there's places like Schiphol that really want to be a multimodal hub that connect all kinds of modes. Then as soon as those bans are in, so I think you can start sharing your screen, and I'll leave you the floor, and it's all up to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. Very nice to share my research here. And thanks a lot for the introduction. So the title of my thesis, it was part in need of my master thesis, and the title of my master thesis was The Market Potential of Hyperloop. And in very short, I looked into the impact of different Hyperloop designs on how travelers choose between high-speed rail, Hyperloop, and air passenger transport, mainly focusing on the environment of Schiphol. Well, shortly, my agenda for today. So we'll start off with a short introduction of how I got to this research. Quickly touch upon the methodology that I applied, but I will mainly focus on my key insights and conclusions, given that I think that is the most interesting bit, and hope to have a nice conversation with all of you in that bit as well. Well, Amsterdam Airport is the third largest airport in Europe in terms of passenger volumes, and Schiphol Airport has been growing very largely over the past years. So is the travel demand for long distance transport within Europe, and it's also expected that this travel demand will only continue to grow in the coming years. In order to deal with that travel demand, Schiphol is looking into other ways of transport as well, given that it's already reached its limits, so to say, and is therefore, very interested in also exploring the options for high-speed rail, but also more innovative modes. And luckily enough, Hyperloop is on that list of innovative modes that they really like to explore further to see what Hyperloop can mean in strengthening their position as multimodal hub within Europe. Over the past years, quite some research has been done on, comparing Hyperloop to plane and its competitive position towards that, or it has been researched how high-speed rail can play a role in substituting short-haul flights, but the comparison between high-speed rail, Hyperloop, and plane in terms of the role that high-speed rail and Hyperloop can play in substituting short-haul flights has not yet been studied. And exactly that research gap is also what brought me to my main research question. It's quite a long sentence that does not read very smoothly, but I will read it out loud to you, and then I break it down a bit more to describe the scope of my research exactly. So the research question is how could different design scenarios for Hyperloop passenger transport influence travelers' mode choice between and the transport demand for air passenger transport, high-speed rail, and Hyperloop for the future of long-distance transport within Europe at Amsterdam Airport. So it consists of several elements. So firstly, I looked into the influence of how Hyperloop is designed on how travelers make choices when choosing between high-speed rail, Hyperloop, and air passenger transport. So I only took into account these three modes, and also specifically focusing on short-haul flights and or long-distance transport, and that translates to when you look into the scope of Europe, 5 journeys of around 500 kilometers. Then you can think about traveling from Amsterdam to London or from Amsterdam to Frankfurt, for example. Those are the type of journeys that I'm looking into, only including trips that have both its origin and its destination within Europe. So that is the scope of my thesis. And in order to answer this research question, I applied a 3-phased approach, so to say. So the main part of this approach is called discrete choice modeling. And this is a statistical method to assess how people, and most often travelers, make choices between different modes of transport in order to understand and also predict the way in which people make choices in the future. I started off with a very thorough stakeholder analysis in order to understand better what are the main design uncertainties in the current Hyperloop design. Secondly, I conducted a stated preference experiment in which I asked customers to choose between Hyperloop, high-speed rail, and air passenger transport, once they're differing quite a lot in terms of various attributes. So you can think of longer or shorter travel times, where it would be located, whether or not baggage can be checked in. And I will come to the details of that experiment, the choice experiment, in a bit. And based on all the choice data that I gathered in the choice experiment, the discrete choice model was estimated. To start off with the stakeholder analysis that I did, I interviewed 9 different people from, I think quite a diverse group of people. So I spoke to experts within the Schiphol, Hard Hyperloop, of course, NS International, which is the train operators in the Netherlands, ProRail, which is the track owner in the Netherlands of the trains, but also to the province of North Holland, and various experts in the field from, for example, TU Delft, but also other research institutes have been included in the stakeholder analysis. And the reason for speaking to all these people was threefold, I would say. So firstly, to get a better feel for all the powers and interest of the different stakeholders. So how interested would they be in the design of Hyperloop, and what is how large is the influence that they could have on how Hyperloop is being designed and implemented. Secondly, I looked into how likely certain stakeholder coalitions are to be formed that are of impact on Hyperloop design and also the solution space of Hyperloop. And thirdly, and this is what I already referred to, is to gain insights in the key design uncertainties for Hyperloop. And the 3 design uncertainties that were mainly put forward were firstly the location of the Hyperloop station. So given that I look at the context of Schiphol Airport, the first option that was often brought forward was locating at the Schiphol Airport itself. And the second option that was put forward was locating it at a new location within 15-minute reach of the city center. I'm aware that locating it at, existing train stations, for example, is also one of the options, but for now, that option is excluded from my research, and it's only including that new locations are the second option. The second design uncertainty brought forward was regarding security checks. So I had quite some interesting conversations about whether or not security checks would be included in the Hyperloop design, and also in which form. So in that sense, I take 3 options into account. So firstly, there are no security checks at all, so comparable to the current high-speed rail system, I would say. Secondly, security checks light, and in this scenario, also innovations to make security checks faster and faster is very important. And the third option in this area is very elaborate security checks. And then you can think of more comparable system as we nowadays know for plane. The third option included, or the third design uncertainty put forward was whether baggage can be checked in, yes or no. So that option is, that design uncertainty is also included in the rest of my research. So based on these three design uncertainties, the stated preference experiment was designed. And as I already quickly mentioned, the stated preference experiment consisted of asking respondents to state their choice between between plane, train, and Hyperloop. And I did that by constructing various choice situations in which all three alternatives were varied in terms of 5 different attributes or aspects, I would say. So firstly, the travel cost, what varied, for example, between what if a Hyperloop ticket would cost 35 euros, a train ticket would be 110, and a plane ticket would be 105, what would you then choose? And these 3 attributes were varied continuously. So it could also be that Hyperloop was put forward as the most expensive alternative, for example. So travel cost would be the cost of the entire trip. So from origin to destination, and not purely for only the main mode of transport, so to say. The second attribute included was in vehicle time. So how much time do people spend in a plane, train, or Hyperloop? Thirdly, waiting time. So how much time do travelers need to wait between different components of their trip? For example, related to the security checks that were put forward as a main design uncertainty, but also the time it takes to check in your baggage is included in that bit. And also walking distances at, for example, Schiphol, from where you enter the airport until where the Hyperloop really departs. So those are elements you can think of when I talk about waiting time. Egress time would be the time it takes to get from really stepping out of the plane, train, or Hyperloop until your final destination. So that includes also walking time at the airport, or exit, the time it takes to really exit the airport or the station. And lastly, baggage handling. So whether or not baggage can be checked in, yes or no. And in this stated preference experiment, I think I got about 340 respondents. I collected this data with a panel in which also it was made sure that the respondents that replied were a representation in terms of socio-demographic characteristics for Dutch society. So I could also look into, the impact of socio-demographics on people's choices. And after cleaning the data, I ended up with about 300 respondents that could actually be used for the experiment. Based on those 300 respondents, a discrete choice model was estimated, and I won't dive into the technical details of that aspect today, but it's good to mention that I estimated 2 different types of models to see what would best fit the choice data that I gathered, and estimated the rest of my results based on the best fitting model, which is logical, I would say. Then onto my key findings. It came forward that waiting time is of very large influence on how attractive travelers find Hyperloop. So when designing Hyperloop, focus should be on really minimizing waiting time. And in this, it is quite a thin balance between also, for example, implementing the security check that is quite time consuming. So I will get back to those exact details later, but this is the first insight of something that travelers find very important in their attractiveness for Hyperloop. Secondly, also having checked in baggage was stated as very high value in terms of how attractive travelers find all 3 modes. So the same applies also for high-speed rail and air passenger transport. So also quite interesting insight for further developing high-speed rail. And thirdly, high costs are of large negative influence on how attractive people find a certain mode. And I don't think that's really a surprise to any of us. In this choice experiment or in the stated preference experiment, I also requested or researched some of the perceptions that people have towards plane, train, and Hyperloop. So how do they see these different modes? And it came forward that most people see Hyperloop as more similar to high-speed rail than to plane. And this was also confirmed by, well, how consistent people were in making their choices and in the choice data that and in the outcome of the model, and also in the perceptions that people have towards high-speed rail. So both high-speed rail and Hyperloop were people that see those two modes as more environmentally friendly are more likely to choose Hyperloop and high-speed rail. Also, perceived comfort is of very high importance or contributes to the attractiveness of these two modes. And the third one is quite interesting, I think, as well, because often Hyperloop is put forward as, well, very frequently departing mode. And it was found that that was only of, well, it improved how attractive people find Hyperloop, but it only has quite a small influence. So it's not that important for travelers, you could say. That's it for the perceptions. Then looking at the sociodemographics, and I looked into if you can define heterogeneous groups of travelers based on sociodemographics. And it turns out that people either traveling, higher educated people with a higher income, and leisure travelers are more likely to find Hyperloop and high-speed rail more attractive. These are sort of the base insights of what I found, and then diving into the different design scenarios of Hyperloop and the impact of that on the market share for Hyperloop. So based on the design uncertainties that I found in my stakeholder analysis, so the location of Hyperloop, the type of security checks, and whether or not baggage can be checked in, 4 different design scenarios were included or were defined, varying on these 3 aspects. So the first scenario is called Hyperloop as the fastest high-speed rail, where, well, Hyperloop is located at a new location, no security check in place, and bags cannot be checked in. So quite similar indeed to the current high-speed rail system. Secondly, Hyperloop is sustainable plane. Hyperloop is located at Schiphol. The security check is like heavy security checks is in place, and bags can be checked in. The third option or scenario that was included is called Hyperloop as completely new system. So it's located at a new location, Hyperloop or very light security check in place due to large technological advancements in that area, and bags can not be checked in. And scenario 4 is Hyperloop as part of the multimodal hub Schiphol, where Hyperloop is located at Schiphol. Security check light is in place and bags can be checked in. So for each of these 4 design scenarios, the market share was calculated for Hyperloop, train, and plane. So for Hyperloop, plane, and train. And I also looked into, okay, well, for each of these design scenarios, when taking then the stakeholder perspective into account, is one of these scenarios more likely to be realized than the other? And especially, is there a disconnect between what travelers find most attractive and what is most likely to become reality from a stakeholder perspective? So that is what I looked into. And the outcome was that scenario 1 and scenario 4, so Hyperloop as faster high-speed rail, and Hyperloop as part of multimodal hub Schiphol, led to the largest potential market share for Hyperloop of 43% and 41% respectively. So that's quite a large market share, even the same, that's quite a large market share, I would say, comparable to plane in these 2 scenarios. And then when taking into account the stakeholder view as well, you can see that, well, if you have to develop an entirely new location for Hyperloop, quite some complex stakeholder dynamics come into play. Like you have to talk with the municipalities, the local transport authorities to have that location approved. Also, a lot of people living in that area, it will have quite a large impact on its surroundings. So from a stakeholder's perspective, it's not very likely to, or it's more complex to develop an entirely new location. Also taking into account that when constructing a new location, also, for example, roads, trains, and metros to that specific location need to be developed as well, and that can be very time consuming. So with that respect, scenario 4 becomes a bit more likely than scenario 1. And in terms of security checks and baggage checking, having that yes or no, no troubles from a stakeholder side are expected, given that purely or mainly the Hyperloop operator and either Schiphol or not even Schiphol should be involved in those decisions. So only in terms of the location of Hyperloop, the stakeholders are of large influence, and therefore I expect that scenario 4 would be the most likely one to become, would be the most likely one, also leading to the highest market share of Hyperloop. So that would be Hyperloop located at Schiphol Airport with security check light in place and checked in baggage. We move to the next slide. So next to these insights on the potential market share, I also wanted to share 6 other key takeaways from my research with you. So the first one is really regarding travel time. So waiting time should definitely be minimized. This can be done by either how you locate Hyperloop and how you set up, for example, walking distances within the Hyperloop stations or at Schiphol, but also by the choices you make for a certain security check. So security check light would there, I think, be most realistic, or no security checks at all. In terms of baggage check-in, travelers largely appreciate the fact that they can check in their baggage, but it is also of impact on waiting time. So there's a very thin line between the extent to which having checked in baggage still leads to a more attractive position for Hyperloop if it leads to very long waiting time. So there should be looked for a balance between those 2 design elements. Thirdly, ticket prices should be determined very carefully, given that only a small increase in ticket prices could already lead to a very large decrease in market share for Hyperloop. That is the third one. Fourthly, locating Hyperloop at Schiphol Airport is most likely from a stakeholder bid, as I said before, but it's also most beneficial for, I would say, almost all parties, given that for Schiphol, it improves its attractive position largely as a multimodal hub, and also for Hyperloop, it comes with quite some advantages, given that it can benefit from the existing very strong infrastructure to reach Schiphol, and also that's something I didn't take into account in this study, but for example, transfer passengers can then also move way easier to Hyperloop. Next key insight that I would like to share is more on how Hyperloop is being marketed. So promoting it very much as comfortable, sustainable, and also I would say frequently departing would help travelers to choose for Hyperloop, or make them more likely to choose for Hyperloop. And higher educated, high income leisure travelers are most likely to choose for Hyperloop. So targeting that specific group could lead to quick wins of market share, and on a longer term focusing on or working on awareness for also the other groups would be my suggested marketing approach in that area. And lastly, Hyperloop is mainly in competition with high-speed rail. So if the pure reason for implementing Hyperloop would be to reduce substitute short-haul flights, it might not be the right mode to do so. Those were my key findings. And then lastly, I also wanted to share some recommendations for further research as well. So in my study, I only included origin destination journeys within Europe of around 500 kilometers, but I think it would be very interesting as well to study longer journeys, include transport passenger as well, and look outside of Europe and see how then these results would be changed or not. Secondly, the fact that a new mode of transport, such as Hyperloop, would be introduced, could also induce travel demand quite significantly. I excluded that bit now from the study, but I would be very interested to look into, firstly, how much travel demand would be induced by the introduction of Hyperloop, and how do travel habits change due to the introduction of Hyperloop. And lastly, I now like Schiphol is looking into innovative modes, which is quite broad, I would say. I now only zoomed in on Hyperloop, but looking into the impact of also other innovative modes on the market share of Hyperloop. So, for example, autonomous vehicles or even sustainable aviation would also be very interesting, I would say. So those were my key recommendations as well. And very curious to hear, well, your questions and thoughts on my research.
Thank you very much, Lotte, for the interesting talk. Then we will just jump straight into the questions. As you also, there are quite some of them. The first one would be related to the first part of your presentation. Someone is asking, what are the implications of your findings for transportation policy and infrastructure planning at the Amsterdam Airport Schiphol and similar European hubs?
Well, I think mainly in terms of infrastructure planning, the space or the room to expand Schiphol is quite limited, I would say. So I think for Schiphol, there's a large challenge in if they indeed want to go for Hyperloop, they have to be very careful in making trade-offs in what they spend their very scarce capacity on, so to say. Looking for the English word, sorry.
Is it viable, like, to do it underground, for example, to...
Exactly, that would significantly reduce the impact of that. But I think, Schiphol should definitely start thinking about how to bring this into their future design, because only plane is not going to bring them the strong future position that they were looking for.
Yes, of course. Then the next one would be that according to how travelers see the comparison between high-speed rail and Hyperloop from an environmental friendliness point of view, a comfort point of view, cost is not mentioned. How do passengers see cost when we're comparing these modes of transport? Do they see it as a decider or rather not?
Yeah, I think for all three modes, it came forward that travel cost is of very large importance, and there was no, like, for high-speed rail, when comparing high-speed rail and Hyperloop, quite a similar value add to that was given, but there was no clear difference in how important that it did not come forward that for air passenger transport or high-speed rail or Hyperloop, travelers find cost more important for one of these three modes. So it was very similar how much cost weighs in their choices.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this may go a bit further, but do you have an order of magnitude? Which pricing are we talking about? Have you looked into it?
Well, I included a range of 3 prices. So okay. I based it upon three locations. So traveling to Frankfurt, Paris, and London. So I looked into, for example, train tickets, how expensive are they? Plane tickets, how expensive are they? And defined in close collaboration with Hyperloop, expected price per kilometer. And now the next question is going to be what that price was, and I don't know it by heart, but we came to a price range of 35 euros until 35 euros, 110 euros, and 185 euros. That was the price range that was included. And it could be quite interesting, I think, to make that the difference in that price range even larger and see, then the impact popping up. But this is the range that I included for now.
Okay, since let's say the beginning, once Hyperloop is deployed.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And when we are now talking about transporting goods and persons, how do you see this split? Because it's true that a big share of the users, or the let's say the freight, which is the goods which are transported, are indeed logistics goods and not necessarily passengers. How do you see there the split?
I think it's quite a different system design, to be honest, because for when you're as a traveler, as a person you're traveling, it's way more important that you have easy access at Schiphol airport. Time, like minutes, count way more than for your package, for example. If it's there for 30 minutes or for 40 minutes, doesn't really matter. But waiting yourself for 30 or 40 minutes already makes quite a large difference in how attractive you find a certain mode. So I think my research is really focused on passenger transport, and I think those findings can not really be applied for freight as well, I would say. And I think that's my view on that bit.
Okay, interesting. And now talking about the takeaway messages, we didn't see, for example, the size of a cabin, let's say, as a criteria to decide whether it makes sense or not, because it's true that in high-speed rail, we do see different types of cabin sizes, classes, and then lengths. So on this regard, how did you look at it, first of all, and second of all, how would this affect to the decision whether it makes sense or not?
I included a fixed cabin size of around, I have to dig deep what my assumption exactly was, but I think I said it on 60 passengers per tube, so per pod. That's my assumption, and I didn't look into the impact of larger or smaller pods on what people would prefer. So I can't really give an answer.
Okay. And if it would be to expand the design uncertainties you chose in your study, which one would those be and why?
Ooh, very interesting question. I think definitely, what would it be? The pod, the size of the vehicles, I think it's very interesting to see, but not necessarily a key design uncertainty of impact, I think, on travelers' choices.
Perhaps it could be the following thesis to look into.
Yeah, it's very interesting because there are a lot of uncertainties, and I think you can refine, for example, the location bit. Like now, I only looked into a new location, but I think it would be way more likely to, for example, locate it at existing stations so you can benefit from already existing infrastructure. So I think maybe more refining the uncertainties that I now put forward into more details would be my main starting point, or my first starting point.
Mm-hmm. Then the following would be, if you could think a reason why people would rather travel with Hyperloop for leisure travels, since travel times are similar to plane, but more comfortable to work during travel.
Yeah, I think this result is largely caused also by the fact that people have never traveled by Hyperloop yet, but see it just as like it's a ground mode and therefore see it as more comparable to a high-speed rail. But I was quite surprised by that insight as well, because if you're traveling for business, you want to be fast, and for leisure, correct, I would care less, to be honest. But so I was surprised about that insight as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next one would be if you saw additional variables such as luggage check-in, station location, and security checks come up from the answer that you got. Basically telling if there are other variables in this direction you looked into, especially talking about checking station locations and security checks, which may have an impact on one of these key takeaway messages.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
If basically additional variables got looked into when looking, especially in the way the passenger is then boarding, let's say, into the Hyperloop, such as check-in, station location, and security checks.
Yeah, I think like what I'm also very interested in is how people sort of whether or not it matters that people are traveling by means of a mode where they can't look outside, and you can play a lot, of course, with sort of protecting screens on the inside of the Hyperloop, or well, taken even further to virtual reality, but still I would find it quite strange to be sort of in a tube while traveling. So that perspective, I think, would be very interesting to explore even further and see how that would impact people's choices. Yeah. And I think regarding the security checks and the baggage check-in, it's now, I only included 2 or 3 options, but I think the technological advancements that will continue in that area over the coming years to make it even faster or more advanced will reduce the waiting times or the time impact of those elements as well. So eventually, I think it's most likely to lead to a system with very good security check that is not so time consuming due to technology. And the same would go for baggage checking, that process is also very smooth.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting because it would be optimizing a bit or getting to another concept to the one similar we have in airports, right?
Yeah.
So machines are already quite advanced.
Yeah, but still, I think having the airport, like copying the current airport system would largely make Hyperloop less attractive, given that then, especially comparing it to very short travel times, your sort of waiting time would be way larger than your travel time. So I think we need to win a lot of time in there before it is worthwhile to implement security and baggage check-in.
Ultimately, the best solution won't be to have a security, so you just port and then
yeah, you can make that very futuristic to make it very smooth.
Exactly. And then the final question is regarding the HTP. They stated that this estimation is based on an average modal shift of 66% from aviation towards Hyperloop. Concerning the passenger demand in Europe by 2050, what are your thoughts on this statement?
The estimation is based on average modal shift. This is this statement is coming from my own thesis. It's based on the modal shift over 6% towards Hyperloop. Yeah, I left it out for now, but I also looked into sort of in the Netherlands, we have an institute creates these different scenarios of like a high, medium, low scenario of how the future will explore. And I also looked into, well, could the travel demand that is being suggested in the highest scenario with the most travelers could then Schiphol Airport, including Hyperloop, accommodate for all the travel demand? I think that is where the statement is coming from. And the answer was that, yes, if we have both Hyperloop train and plane, we can accommodate for all passenger transport. But I'm not sure if that, like, I'm not sure who answered the question, if that is indeed the answer, what they're looking for. Oh, it's been anonymous, but please shout if you want additional elaboration from my side on this bit.
And then the very, very last one would be if the station was actually got to be near to the train station, how would this affect to the 3 uncertainties we saw before?
I think it would largely it would be a very positive influence on the on how people chose for Hyperloop. But given that it minimizes your waiting time, there's no security checks, so that is but that also doesn't cost time, and only the baggage check-in bit would be of negative impact, I would say, because people very much like it. But still, then in the balance between waiting time and, for example, security and baggage checking, you really go to minimizing waiting time at all, like completely. So I think still that would lead to quite a good market share.
Thank you very much, Lotte, for this. We also finished the Q&A round, and I would like to hand over to Andrea.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. Thank you, Lotte, for your presentation, and thanks everyone for all of those questions. It was really interesting. Next week, we're gonna have a quite interesting session. So we have 3 students, so from 2 student teams, which are gonna present their research papers on different kinds of cooling. So we're actually gonna have a comparison between the 2 systems in the hour, and we're gonna have a discussion. Exactly. So one team is from TU Delft and the other one from Swiss Loop, so ETH. So I'm very much looking forward to this one. I think it's going to be quite interesting. And we also have a special session coming up. So it's actually going to be on Monday, the 27th, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., which is more directed to all of the Hyperloop teams, which are competing at EHW. But of course, every engineer or everyone who is interested can join the session. So it's mainly about the successful demonstration for the EHW, so for the competition. But of course, in general, it's covering lots of engineering topics regarding Hyperloop. Yeah, and with that being said, one last thing. So if you want to maybe look over this talk again, or just know more about Hyperloop, so you can check out all of our talks on our YouTube channel, Hyperloop Seminar. Yeah, every seminar is being recorded and put on YouTube, and yeah, you can check those out. And if you have questions, you can comment there or write us. And yeah, exactly. So now we're at the end of the seminar. So thanks everyone for joining. And I hope I see lots of you next week or on Monday. Thank you.